On March 17, 1953, police arrived at Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore's brownstone on Cherry Street in Salem, Massachusetts. They found her body in the sitting room, positioned in her reading chair, her face frozen in an expression that veteran detective Raymond Walsh would later describe as absolute terror, like she'd seen something beyond this world. The window stood open despite the bitter cold. On the mantelpiece sat a black cat with amber eyes, meticulously grooming itself beside a leather-bound journal. When officers approached the animal, it didn't flee. It simply stared at them with what Walsh described as an intelligence that didn't belong in any creature's eyes. Eleanor Whitmore was the 7th owner of that cat in exactly 7 months. Every single previous owner had died within 30 days of taking the animal home. The police department had no official connection between the deaths, until they opened that journal and discovered what Eleanor had been documenting in her final hours. What they found in those pages would challenge everything they thought they knew about coincidence, about fate, and about the line between the natural and the unnatural. But the truth was far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Before we uncover the truth about the Black Cat Curse and the 7 deaths that terrified Salem, make sure to subscribe to Fear Sermon and ring that notification bell. We bring you the darkest, most mysterious chapters of history that others are afraid to tell. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers around the world. Now let's step back to where this nightmare began. The autumn of 1952 was a peculiar time in Salem, Massachusetts. While the rest of America fixed its gaze on the upcoming presidential election and the continuing tensions of the Cold War, this historic town wrestled with its own complicated relationship with the past. Nearly 260 years after the infamous witch trials, Salem had transformed into a community that both profited from and remained haunted by its dark history. Tourism had become a cottage industry, with visitors flocking to sites associated with the trials. Yet longtime residents maintained an almost superstitious aversion to discussing certain aspects of their town's legacy. The Harrington antique shop stood on Essex Street, tucked between a haberdashery and a pharmacy that still mixed compounds by hand. The shop had been in the Harrington family since 1847, occupying a building that dated back to the early 1700s. Local legend claimed, though this was never verified, that one of the original trial judges had once lived on the property. The shop's proprietor, 63-year-old Marcus Harrington, was a fastidious man known for his encyclopedic knowledge of New England antiquities and his habit of keeping detailed provenance records for every item in his inventory. October 23, 1952, Marcus acquired a peculiar estate collection from a recently deceased physician named Dr. Nathaniel Corbett. Among the usual assortment of furniture, books, and household items was a black cat that Dr. Corbett's housekeeper insisted was part of the estate and needed to be included in the sale. The cat wore no collar, answered to no name, and according to the housekeeper, a woman named Mrs. Jean Patterson, who'd worked for Dr. Corbett for 15 years, had simply appeared in the doctor's study one evening in late September. The doctor was quite taken with it, Mrs. Patterson told Marcus during the estate handover, said it reminded him of a cat from his childhood. He'd been in poor health, you understand, but that last month, well, he seemed different, distracted. He'd spend hours just staring at that animal. Dr. Corbett had died of what the death certificate listed as acute heart failure on October 19th. Exactly 29 days after Mrs. Patterson first noticed the cat in the house. Marcus, never one to turn away an animal, accepted the cat along with the rest of the estate. He was a practical man, after all. The old shop had mice, and cats were useful creatures. Marcus Harrington died in his sleep on November 21, 1952, 29 days after taking possession of the cat. The death was ruled natural. Marcus had a history of high blood pressure and was approaching an age where sudden cardiac events weren't uncommon. His nephew, Thomas Harrington, inherited the shop. At the funeral, Thomas's wife, Patricia, mentioned that Uncle Marcus had seemed unusually anxious in his final weeks, often speaking about strange dreams and insisting that something in the shop was watching him. The family attributed this to the early stages of dementia. No one made any connection to the black cat that Thomas brought home after clearing out the shop's living quarters. The post-war years had ushered in an age of rationality and science. America was splitting atoms and developing vaccines. In this climate, the suggestion that a cat could be anything other than a cat would have been dismissed as medieval superstition. The good people of Salem prided themselves on having moved beyond such thinking. They were modern, educated, scientific. They had no idea what was living among them. Thomas Harrington never made it to Christmas. On December 19th, exactly 28 days after his uncle's funeral, Patricia found him at the bottom of their basement stairs, his neck broken, his eyes wide open and staring at something only he could see. The black cat sat at the top of the stairs, silhouetted against the light from the kitchen. "I heard Thomas scream," Patricia told the police. "It wasn't a scream of surprise, it was pure terror. By the time I reached the basement door, he was already gone. And that cat was just sitting there, completely calm, like it was waiting for something." The death was ruled accidental. The basement stairs were steep and poorly lit. Thomas, the coroner suggested, had simply lost his footing. Patricia refused to keep the cat. She gave it to her neighbor, Mr. Albert Brennan, a retired accountant who lived alone and welcomed the company. She never told him about the two previous owners. What would she have said? That she suspected a cat of murder? In the light of day, such thoughts seemed ridiculous. Albert Brennan lasted 27 days. He was found on January 15, 1953, drowned in his bathtub. The peculiarity of the scene troubled the responding officer, Patrolman Dennis Murphy. "The bathroom door was locked from the inside," Murphy wrote in his report. "Mr. Brennan was fully clothed, including his shoes. The bathtub was filled to the brim with cold water. His face showed signs of extreme distress, but there were no indicators of struggle or foul play. Most unusually, there was a black cat sitting on the closed toilet lid, completely dry despite the water splashed throughout the bathroom." Brennan's death was eventually ruled as death by misadventure, possibly a seizure or stroke that caused him to fall into the tub. The locked door? Perhaps he'd locked it himself before his medical event. The fact that he was fully clothed? Some people did have seizures or strokes while doing odd things. The dry cat in a wet bathroom? Just a strange detail that didn't fit into any pattern, because there was no pattern. Not yet. The cat went to Brennan's sister, Martha Brennan-Cole, who lived with her husband Richard in a modest home near Salem Common. Martha, a school teacher, was a devotee of logic and reason. When Richard mentioned that the cat made him uneasy, she chided him for being superstitious. "It's just an animal," she said. "A beautiful, well-behaved animal that Albert clearly loved." On February 10th, 26 days after taking the cat, Martha Brennan-Cole was found dead in her classroom. It was a Saturday. She'd gone to school to prepare lessons for Monday. The janitor discovered her slumped over her desk, a red pen still in her hand. On the chalkboard behind her, someone had written the number 26 over and over in increasingly frantic handwriting. The black cat was sitting on the windowsill, watching. The school principal, Mr. Howard Prescott, told investigators, "The windows were all closed and locked from the inside. We have no idea how that cat got into the building." Martha's face. "I've never seen someone look so frightened. Whatever she saw before she died, it wasn't natural." The coroner's report listed sudden cardiac arrest as the cause of death, noting extreme elevation of stress hormones suggesting acute psychological trauma immediately before death. The writing on the chalkboard was attributed to Martha herself, possibly in the throes of a medical emergency that caused confusion and panic. The cat? Perhaps Martha had brought it to school with her. People did strange things in their final moments. Richard Cole wanted nothing to do with the cat, but his wife, best friend, Dorothy Sawyer, volunteered to take it. Dorothy was a widow who'd recently lost her husband to cancer. She thought caring for an animal might ease her grief. Richard tried to warn her, tried to explain the strange series of deaths, but Dorothy just smiled sadly and said, "Richard, I understand you're looking for meaning in loss. We all do. But these were just coincidences. Terrible, tragic coincidences." Dorothy Sawyer died on March 7th. 25 days later, she was found in her garden, collapsed among her early spring tulips. Her neighbor, Mrs. Edith Chen, told police, "I heard Dorothy screaming that afternoon. I rushed over and found her on the ground, still alive but barely conscious. She kept saying, 'The eyes, they see everything.' She died before the ambulance arrived. That black cat was sitting on her chest, just staring down at her." Now finally someone noticed the pattern. Detective Raymond Walsh had been with the Salem Police Department for 18 years. He prided himself on his attention to detail and his refusal to believe in anything that couldn't be proven with evidence. When he responded to Dorothy Sawyer's death and heard Mrs. Chen's description of the black cat, something nagged at him. He'd seen a black cat recently, at another death scene. He returned to the station and began pulling files. Thomas Harrington, Albert Brennan, Martha Brennan-Cole, Dorothy Sawyer, all dead within weeks of each other, all connected by a black cat. Walsh dug deeper and discovered the connection to Marcus Harrington and Dr. Nathaniel Corbett. 6 deaths, 6 owners, each death occurring between 25 and 29 days after taking possession of the animal. Walsh brought his findings to his captain, Frank Morrison, who was skeptical but intrigued. "So what are you saying, Walsh? That a cat is killing people? This isn't the Middle Ages." "I'm saying there's a statistical anomaly here that warrants investigation," Walsh replied. 6 deaths, all connected to the same animal, all occurring within a specific time frame. "That's not coincidence, Captain, that's a pattern." Morrison authorized Walsh to investigate, but quietly. "The last thing we need is panic about a killer cat," Morrison said. "Can you imagine the headlines? Salem would become a laughingstock." Walsh's first step was to find the cat. It had been at Dorothy Sawyer's house when she died. Where had it gone? The answer came from Dorothy's niece, Eleanor Whitmore, who'd inherited her aunt's small estate. Eleanor had taken the cat home with her on March 8th. When Walsh called her on March 16th to ask some questions about her aunt's death, Eleanor mentioned she'd been experiencing terrible nightmares since bringing the cat home. "It watches me," she told Walsh over the phone. "Constantly. Those amber eyes just follow me everywhere. I know it sounds crazy, but I feel like it's waiting for something." "Mrs. Whitmore," Walsh said carefully, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. I'm coming to your house right now. Don't let that cat near you. Lock yourself in a room if you have to. I'll be there in 15 minutes. "Detective, you're frightening me. What's this about?" "Please, Mrs. Whitmore, just do as I say. I'll explain everything when I arrive." Walsh never made it to Eleanor's house in time. He got caught in traffic. A minor accident on the bridge had created a delay. When he arrived at 5:47 p.m. on March 17th, other officers were already there. Eleanor Whitmore had called 911 at 5:23 p.m., screaming incoherently about the eyes and it knows before the line went dead. Officers arrived at 5:35 p.m. and found Eleanor dead in her chair. It had been exactly 9 days since she'd taken possession of the cat. But Eleanor Whitmore had done something none of the previous owners had done. She had documented everything. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button and share this with someone who loves dark mysteries. The journal Eleanor left behind would reveal something that law enforcement had never encountered before. Let's discover what happens next and uncover the terrifying truth she recorded in her final hours. Detective Walsh found the journal on Eleanor's mantelpiece, right beside the black cat. The leather-bound book was open to the final entry, dated March 17, 1953, 4:47 p.m., less than an hour before Eleanor's death. Walsh later testified that his hands shook as he read those final words, written in increasingly erratic handwriting. "It's not just watching anymore. It's showing me things. Memories that aren't mine. I see Dr. Corbett in his study, clutching his chest, and those eyes are there, reflecting something in his pupils. Fear, yes, but also recognition. I see Marcus in his shop, backing away from something invisible, something only he can see. I see Thomas falling, but he isn't tripping. He's running from something that isn't there, except it is there, reflected in those amber eyes. The cat doesn't move, doesn't need to. It just watches, and somehow that watching makes things happen. Or maybe it doesn't make them happen. Maybe it just sees them happening, sees them before they happen, sees all the possible ways a person can die and just waits. I counted the days. 29 for Dr. Corbett, 29 for Marcus, 28 for Thomas, 27 for Albert, 26 for Martha, 25 for Aunt Dorothy. Each owner dies one day sooner than the last. If the pattern holds, I have until tomorrow, day 9, but I can feel it already starting. My heart is racing. My chest feels tight. The cat is on the mantel now, and I swear I can see things in its eyes. Reflections that shouldn't be there. Shadows that move wrong, and something else, something that looks like me but isn't me, doing something terrible. Seeing something terrible. I tried to get rid of it. Took it to the animal shelter this morning, but it was back before I got home, sitting on my porch like it had never left. How? I drove it 6 miles away. The shelter worker assured me they'd put it in a secure kennel. But there it was, waiting for me. I think I understand now. It's not the cat that's cursed. We are. Each of us who owned it. The curse doesn't travel with the cat. It's already here, written into our fate the moment we take possession. The cat is just a witness, a marker, a countdown timer wearing fur. I can feel my heart struggling now. The room is getting darker even though the sun hasn't set. The cat hasn't moved in hours, just sits there, watching, those amber eyes reflecting things I can't look away from. I see my father's death. I see the accident that took my husband. I see every moment of pain and fear I've ever experienced, all playing out in those eyes, simultaneously. This is how it happens. Not with violence, with knowing, with seeing, with understanding exactly how and when you're going to die, and being powerless to stop it. The fear itself becomes the weapon. The heart can only take so much terror before. The entry ended mid-sentence. Walsh had the journal dusted for fingerprints. Only Eleanor's were found. He had her handwriting verified by an expert. It was authentic. He interviewed Eleanor's friends and family. No one reported any history of mental illness or delusion. Eleanor Whitmore had been, by all accounts, a rational, clear-headed woman until she brought that cat home. The medical examiner, Dr. Harold Chen, performed Eleanor's autopsy with unusual thoroughness at Walsh's request. His findings were both conclusive and disturbing. Mrs. Whitmore died of acute cardiac arrest brought on by extreme psychological stress. The level of cortisol and adrenaline in her system was consistent with someone in absolute terror. Her heart was healthy. This was not an underlying condition waiting to manifest. Something scared this woman literally to death, but it was the physical evidence in the room that truly unnerved investigators. The window had been found open, despite the cold March evening. Walsh examined the window carefully. The lock was intact and functioning. It hadn't been broken or forced. Eleanor must have opened it herself. But why? In her journal's earlier entries, she'd mentioned keeping all windows and doors locked because she feared the cat escaping and, paradoxically, feared it getting out and still finding its way back. Patrolman Murphy, who'd been first on scene at Albert Brennan's death, examined the room and noted, "Same type of scene as Brennan's bathroom. The victim showed no signs of physical struggle. But the environmental evidence suggests frantic activity. Overturned water glass, books knocked from the side table, scratch marks on the chair arms where she'd gripped too tightly. Most disturbing were the victim's eyes, like she'd seen something that rewired her entire understanding of reality in her final moments." Walsh ordered a full background investigation on the cat itself. Where had it come from before Dr. Corbett? Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper, was interviewed again. She described the evening the cat appeared. "It was September 20th, a Friday evening. I was preparing to leave for the day when I heard Dr. Corbett call out from his study. He sounded excited, which was odd. He'd been quite withdrawn since his wife passed earlier that year. I found him at his desk with this black cat sitting on his papers. Just sitting there, calm as you please. 'Look, Jean,' he said, 'it came right in through the window, just like Midnight used to do when I was a boy.' He seemed happy for the first time in months. I didn't have the heart to suggest we find its owner." September 20th, Dr. Corbett died October 19th, 29 days later. Walsh attempted to trace the cat's history before Dr. Corbett, but the trail went cold. No one in the neighborhood reported a missing black cat. No veterinarian in the area had records of treating such an animal. It was as if the cat had simply materialized in Dr. Corbett's study that September evening. The animal itself remained maddeningly normal under examination. A veterinarian, Dr. Susan Martinez, examined it at Walsh's request and found a healthy male cat, approximately 3 to 5 years old, well-nourished, with no identifying marks or signs of abuse. The cat displayed typical feline behavior, aloof but not aggressive, calm under handling, responsive to normal stimuli. There is absolutely nothing physically unusual about this animal. Yet one detail from Dr. Martinez's report would haunt Walsh. When I looked into the cat's eyes to check pupillary response, I experienced a moment of severe disorientation. I saw my reflection in the cat's pupils, but the reflection was wrong somehow, like I was looking at myself from an angle that shouldn't be possible. The sensation passed quickly, and I attributed it to fatigue. However, I found myself reluctant to make eye contact with the animal after that initial examination. The journal contained one more crucial piece of information. Eleanor had researched the cat obsessively during her 9 days of ownership. Among her notes, Walsh found a reference to a newspaper article from 1847, the year Marcus Harrington's grandfather had established the antique shop. The article, from the Salem Gazette, described a fire that destroyed the previous building on that site. One fatality was reported, a woman named Abigail Thorne, who was known locally as a peculiar sort, who kept to herself and was rumored to practice folk magic. The article quoted a surviving neighbor. "Miss Thorne had a black cat with amber eyes that she claimed could see into the future. Nonsense, of course, but she believed it fervently. The morning of the fire, several witnesses reported seeing Miss Thorne frantically trying to save the cat. while the building burned around her. The last anyone saw, she was at the window, the cat in her arms, screaming something about, "It has to survive," before the floor collapsed. They never found the cat's body, only Miss Thorne's. Eleanor had underlined this passage and written in the margin, "Same cat? Impossible. But those eyes, those amber eyes, I've seen them in my dreams since childhood. How is that possible?" Detective Walsh faced an impossible situation. He had 7 bodies, a clear pattern, and a suspect that was a cat. He couldn't arrest the cat. He couldn't prove the cat had done anything. In fact, he couldn't prove the cat had been physically present at the moment of each death, only that each victim had taken ownership of the animal and died within 30 days, with each subsequent death occurring 1 day sooner than the last. On March 18th, Walsh presented his findings to Captain Morrison and the district attorney, Robert Hamilton. The meeting did not go well. Hamilton listened to Walsh's presentation, examined Eleanor's journal, and reviewed the medical reports. Then he leaned back in his chair and said, "Detective Walsh, what exactly do you expect me to do with this? Charge a cat with murder? Even if I believe this pattern was anything other than a bizarre coincidence, we have no mechanism in our legal system to address it. We prosecute people, not animals." 7 people are dead, Walsh argued, and if my calculations are correct, if this pattern continues, the next owner will die in 8 days, then 7, then 6. Someone needs to take responsibility for this animal before more people die. Morrison interjected, "And what do you suggest, that we euthanize a cat based on a theory about a curse? The ASPCA would have our—" Can you see that headline? But Walsh had a point that couldn't be ignored. Someone needed to take possession of the cat, and based on the pattern, that person was in serious danger. The question became, where was the cat now? The answer came from an unexpected source. On March 19th, Officer Murphy reported that his 9-year-old daughter, Amy, had found a black cat in their backyard and begged to keep it. Murphy, who'd been present at multiple death scenes involving the cat, immediately suspected what it was. He'd secured the animal in their garage and called Walsh. Walsh arrived within the hour and confirmed it was the same cat. Murphy was beside himself. "How did it get to my house? I live 8 miles from Eleanor Whitmore's address. How did it find me?" The incident raised a terrifying possibility the cat was choosing its next owners. But how? And why Murphy? Walsh interviewed Murphy extensively. Murphy had responded to Albert Brennan's death and Eleanor Whitmore's death. He'd seen the cat at both scenes. In Eleanor's case, he'd actually picked the cat up and moved it off the mantelpiece to examine the journal. "When I picked it up," Murphy recalled, "it was completely docile. Didn't scratch or resist, just looked at me with those amber eyes. I remember thinking it was like it was studying me." The realization hit Walsh like a physical blow. The cat chooses whoever handles it at the death scene. Mrs. Patterson handled it at Dr. Corbett's estate. Thomas Harrington handled it when clearing his uncle's shop. The pattern continues. Each person who takes possession is someone who had direct contact with a cat at the previous owner's death. This meant Murphy had approximately 8 days to live. If the pattern held, the police department faced an unprecedented situation. They couldn't let Murphy keep the cat, but they also couldn't simply give it away to an unsuspecting person. That would be tantamount to murder. Captain Morrison made a decision. The cat would be secured at the police station under constant observation. No one would claim ownership. Maybe, Morrison theorized, if no one officially owned the cat, the pattern would break. Walsh was skeptical but had no better solution. The cat was placed in a secure holding room typically used for evidence storage. A rotating roster of officers was assigned to observe it, with strict instructions not to handle the animal and not to make eye contact with it for extended periods. Several officers reported feeling uneasy around the cat, describing sensations of being watched or experiencing intrusive thoughts. Officer Sarah Chen reported, "I was on watch from midnight to 4 a.m. Around 2 a.m. I looked in at the cat and could have sworn I saw my reflection in its eyes, but I was wearing my uniform in the reflection, not the civilian clothes I'm currently wearing. It felt like I was seeing myself in the future or the past." Murphy, despite not officially owning the cat, began experiencing symptoms similar to those described by previous owners. He reported nightmares, feelings of impending doom, and an obsessive need to check on the cat. At the station, Dr. Martinez, the veterinarian who'd examined the cat, evaluated Murphy and found elevated blood pressure and heart rate, consistent with severe anxiety. "The psychological impact of believing he's cursed may be enough to trigger a cardiac event," she warned. "His fear could literally kill him, curse or not." On March 26th, 8 days after Murphy had found the cat, exactly as the pattern predicted, Murphy collapsed at the police station. He was rushed to Salem Hospital where doctors stabilized him. He'd experienced a severe panic attack that mimicked a heart attack, but his heart itself was undamaged. Murphy survived, breaking the pattern for the first time. Walsh visited Murphy in the hospital and found him weak but alive. "I don't understand," Murphy said. "According to your pattern, I should be dead." Walsh had a theory. "You never took ownership. You found the cat, yes, but you immediately secured it and called me. You never took it home, never named it, never claimed it as yours. Maybe that's the key. The curse requires ownership, not just contact." If Walsh was right, they'd found the loophole. Keep the cat in permanent, police custody, with no individual owner, and no one else would die. The Salem Police Department would become the indefinite guardian of what the press would later dub the Black Cat of Salem. But the story didn't end there. On April 3rd, Captain Morrison was found dead in his office. He'd stayed late to complete paperwork and was discovered the next morning by the cleaning staff, slumped over his desk. The cause of death was a massive heart attack. His face bore the same expression of terror that had marked all the previous victims. An investigation revealed that Morrison had signed official paperwork on March 18th, the day the cat was brought to the station, designating the Salem Police Department as the legal custodian of one black male cat, unidentified owner, held as evidence in ongoing investigation. By signing that document as the ranking officer, Morrison had technically claimed ownership on behalf of the department. 17 days after signing that document, he was dead. The pattern had reasserted itself, but with a modification. Institutional ownership seemed to extend the timeline. Instead of 8 days, the next number in the original sequence, Morrison had lived 17 days, exactly double. The implications were staggering. If the curse adapted to circumstance, if it could account for loopholes and find new ways to manifest, then it wasn't just a pattern, it was intelligent. Or at least, something intelligent was guiding it. The district attorney's office immediately ordered the cat removed from police custody. But where could they send it? Any shelter or sanctuary would require someone to sign custodial papers. Any individual owner was at risk. The Animal Control Department refused to accept it. No veterinary clinic would house it. The cat had become untouchable, literally. In the end, an unlikely solution emerged. Father Michael Brennan, a Catholic priest and the brother of the late Albert Brennan, volunteered to take the cat. "I don't claim ownership," he explained to Walsh. "In Catholic doctrine, priests own nothing personally. All belongs to God and the Church. If this is truly a curse, perhaps it cannot affect someone who owns nothing." Father Brennan took the cat to St. Mary's Rectory on April 5, 1953. He blessed the animal, prayed over it, and placed it in a room with religious iconography. "I've dealt with many things that cannot be easily explained," he told Walsh. "Faith requires us to acknowledge mysteries beyond our understanding. If this cat is a vessel for something dark, then perhaps it needs to be met with something light." Father Brennan lived beyond 30 days. In fact, he lived another 12 years, passing away peacefully in 1965 at the age of 73 from natural causes. The black cat remained at the rectory throughout that time, fed and cared for by a rotation of nuns and priests, but never owned by any individual. The cat itself disappeared in 1963, walking out of the rectory one summer evening and never returning. Father Brennan noted its disappearance in the church records but did not search for it. "If it's meant to be found," he wrote, "it will be. And if it's not, then perhaps its purpose here has concluded." There have been no confirmed sightings since. The Black Cat case, as it became known internally, was never officially closed. The Salem Police Department maintained a sealed file on the investigation, accessible only to ranking officers. Detective Walsh continued to research similar cases throughout his career, finding tantalizing hints of patterns but nothing as clear-cut as the Salem deaths. In 1957, Walsh discovered a series of deaths in Newport, Rhode Island, between 1948 and 1949, all connected to a black dog that residents claimed had eyes like amber fire. The deaths followed a similar pattern, each owner dying within weeks of taking possession of the animal, with diminishing intervals between deaths. The case file noted that the dog disappeared after the 7th death and was never found. A 1961 report from Portland, Maine, described a white cat with unusual yellow eyes that was present at 4 suspicious deaths over a 3-month period. The cat was eventually taken in by a convent, where it lived for several years before disappearing. Walsh noted the similarity to the Salem case but could find no direct connection. These cases raised disturbing questions about the nature of what people were experiencing. Were these separate entities, different animals with similar curses, Or was it the same force, manifesting in different forms across New England? Walsh's personal notes, discovered after his death in 1979, suggested he believed the latter. It's not about the animal itself. The cat, or dog, or whatever form it takes, is just a vessel. Something is using these creatures to interact with our world, to observe us, to mark us. The question isn't, what is the cat? It's what is using the cat and why. The case had a profound impact on how law enforcement approached unexplained deaths. While no department officially acknowledged investigating supernatural causes, several New England police departments quietly established protocols for identifying pattern-based deaths that defied conventional explanation. These protocols included tracking deaths connected to specific objects or animals, noting recurring environmental factors, and preserving detailed scene documentation even when cause of death seemed straightforward. Dr. Harold Chen, the medical examiner who'd performed Eleanor Whitmore's autopsy, became interested in the phenomenon of people literally being scared to death. His research contributed to medical understanding of stress cardiomyopathy, also known as broken heart syndrome, a condition where extreme emotional stress can cause acute heart failure in otherwise healthy individuals. Chen's work was pioneering, though he never publicly connected it to the Black Cat case. His private papers, donated to the Massachusetts Medical Society archives after his death, include extensive notes on fear as a weapon and the physiology of supernatural terror. The case also influenced psychological research into mass suggestion and collective belief. Dr. Margaret Whitfield, a psychologist who studied the Salem case files in the 1970s, proposed that the deaths might. Others viewed it as a parable about attachment and possession, suggesting that the act of claiming ownership over another living being could create a karmic debt. Father Brennan's success in neutralizing the curse by refusing personal ownership seemed to support this interpretation. The case had lasting effects on the families involved. Patricia Harrington, who'd lost her husband Thomas, never recovered from the trauma. She became reclusive, refusing to keep any pets and struggling with persistent nightmares about amber eyes watching her. She died in 1968, and friends reported she'd never stopped believing the cat had somehow marked her, that she'd only survived because she'd given it away before the countdown reached her. Richard Cole, Martha Brennan-Cole's widower, became an advocate for investigating deaths that traditional forensics couldn't explain. He corresponded with Detective Walsh for years, sharing news articles about similar cases and developing his own theories. "My wife was a rational woman," he wrote to Walsh in 1959. "She didn't believe in curses or supernatural evil, but rationality didn't save her. Maybe we need to accept that there are forces in this world that operate by rules we don't understand yet. That doesn't make them supernatural, it just makes them unknown." The Salem community itself tried to forget the case. By the late 1950s, the town was actively promoting itself as a tourist destination focused on Halloween and the witch trial history. A series of unexplained deaths connected to a possibly cursed cat didn't fit the marketable narrative. Local historians who documented the town's modern era often omitted the Black Cat case entirely, or relegated it to a footnote about a brief period of superstitious panic in the 1950s. But those who lived through it never forgot. Mrs. Edith Chen, the neighbor who'd found Dorothy Sawyer dying in her garden, moved out of Salem within a year. In a 1972 interview with a paranormal investigator, she stated, "I looked into that cat's eyes the day Dorothy died. I saw things, my own death, my husband's death, deaths I recognized but couldn't name. I was 63 years old at the time, and I'd lived a full life without ever believing in anything supernatural. But what I saw in those amber eyes convinced me that there are things in this world that exist beyond our comprehension. Things that watch us, things that count down our days." Perhaps most significantly, the case contributed to a broader cultural conversation about the limits of rationality and science. The 1950s were an era of tremendous faith in scientific progress and logical explanation. The Black Cat case presented something that resisted both, a pattern that was undeniable yet inexplicable, deadly yet untouchable. It suggested that despite all our modern knowledge, we were still vulnerable to forces that operated by rules we couldn't understand or control. The question that haunted Detective Walsh until his death, and that continues to haunt those who study the case, is simple but profound. If the cat was just a vessel, what was it a vessel for? What intelligence or force was counting down those days, marking those owners, orchestrating those deaths? And where is it now? Of rationality and science. The 1950s were an era of tremendous faith in scientific progress and logical explanation. The black cat case presented something that resisted both, a pattern that was undeniable yet inexplicable, deadly yet untouchable. It suggested that despite all our modern knowledge, we were still vulnerable to forces that operated by rules we couldn't understand or control. The question that haunted Detective Walsh until his death, and that continues to haunt those who study the case, is simple but profound. If the cat was just a vessel, what was it a vessel for? What intelligence or force was counting down those days, marking those owners, orchestrating those deaths? And where is it now? The black cat with amber eyes was last seen in 1963, walking away from St. Mary's Rectory into the summer twilight. 62 years later, its whereabouts remain unknown. The official police records are sealed. The death certificates list natural causes. If you didn't know the full story, you'd find nothing to connect 7 deaths across 5 months in 1952 and 1953. But the families remember. The investigators who worked the case remember. And somewhere in the records of small New England towns, there may be other cases, other patterns, other animals with amber eyes that watched people die. What do you think was behind these deaths? Was it a genuine supernatural curse, a case of mass hysteria and self-fulfilling prophecy, or something else entirely that we still don't have the knowledge to understand? Leave your theories in the comments below. Have you heard similar stories from your area? Has anyone in your family ever experienced something they couldn't explain? If this story has left you wanting more mysteries from America's dark history, make sure you're subscribed to Fear Sermon. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the cases that textbooks won't touch. Share this video with someone who appreciates the darker corners of our past. And if you ever encounter a black cat with amber eyes that seems just a little too intelligent, a little too aware, maybe don't take it home. See you in the next video. Sleep well.